reading of my father's will was scheduled for Tuesday, which felt wrong somehow. Tuesdays are for grocery runs and dentist appointments and forgetting to call someone back. Not for the moment your family decides, officially and in writing, that you never mattered. I sat in the third row of chairs in Hargrove and Associates on Clement Street, wearing the only blazer I owned. The navy one I'd bought second-hand for my nursing board interview 3 years ago. My older sister Fiona was in the front row wearing a camel coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She didn't turn around when I walked in. My Aunt Ruth did. She looked at me the way you look at a stray that's wandered into a nice restaurant. Pitying. Slightly irritated. Wondering who let it in. The attorney's name was Mr. Caulfield. He had the manner of a man who had delivered bad news so many times it had stopped feeling like anything. He set his reading glasses on his nose and opened the folder on the desk, and I remember thinking, I already know what's in there. I've known since the funeral. My father, Leonard Hale, had died 6 weeks earlier of a stroke. He was 68. He had built a regional insurance company from a single-room office in Sacramento into something with 4 locations and 40 employees and a name that people in our county recognized. He had worked for it quietly and steadily for 30 years, and I had watched him do it, even when watching was the only thing I was allowed to do. I'm the younger daughter. There's Fiona, who is 4 years older and who looks like my mother, and who my mother liked in the specific way that people like mirrors, because she confirmed everything my mother already believed about herself. And there's me, Hazel, who looks like my father's side, who went into nursing instead of business school, who chose a 2-bedroom apartment in the outer Sunset over the maiden house my mother thought I should be angling toward, who had, as my mother once put it at a dinner party I was supposed to find funny, always marched to a slightly out-of-tune drum. The family business was going to Fiona. That part I had expected. Fiona had worked there, learned it, had her name on the org chart. It made sense in the logic of the family, even if the logic of the family had never quite included me. What I didn't expect was the rest. Mr. Caulfield read through the asset list in the flat voice of someone reading a grocery receipt. The house in Marin, assessed at $1.4 million to my mother. The business and its associated properties to Fiona and a designated trust. The vacation property in Lake Tahoe to Fiona. The investment portfolio. And here he paused just slightly, the only crack in his professional composure, because even he seemed to understand this was the part, to Fiona. And to me, the contents of my father's home office, bookshelves, a desk, a filing cabinet. My mother had the grace, or maybe the cowardice, not to look at me. Fiona did. She turned in her camel coat and looked directly at me with an expression I had seen my whole life and had spent my whole life trying to decode. It wasn't cruel exactly. It was something worse. It was satisfied. He loved you, my Aunt Ruth said afterward, in the parking lot, in the tone people use when they're handing you a consolation that they know isn't enough. He just, you know how he was. He wasn't good at the complicated things. I drove home. I didn't cry until I was on the Bay Bridge. And then I cried in the specific ugly way you cry when you've been holding it for a very long time. I should tell you something about my father, because the will was not the whole story, even though it felt like it at the time. He was a quiet man. Not cold. Quiet. There's a difference, though it took me a long time to understand it. He showed up to things. He drove 3 hours round trip to watch my nursing pinning ceremony in a folding chair in a hospital auditorium that smelled like antiseptic. He remembered the name of every patient I mentioned more than once. When I got my first apartment, he showed up unannounced on a Saturday with a toolbox and spent 4 hours fixing everything that was broken. And then he sat at my kitchen table and drank coffee and asked me what I was reading. He didn't talk much about feelings. He didn't push back on my mother when she made the comments she made. I used to be angry about that. I used to think his silence was agreement. I understand now that it wasn't. But understanding it now doesn't rewrite the years when I didn't know it. After the will was read, I collected the office contents on a Thursday. My mother wasn't home, or was home and staying upstairs, which amounted to the same thing. Fiona had sent her assistant to let me in, which told me everything I needed to know about how the power had already shifted in that house. The desk was old, solid cherry wood, too heavy to move by myself, so I wasn't taking it. The bookshelves had mostly technical volumes. tax law, insurance regulation, industry publications from the 90s. I packed what felt personal. His fountain pen, a framed photo of the two of us at Muir Woods when I was maybe 7, which I hadn't known existed, a coffee mug from Sacramento State that had a chip in the handle. The filing cabinet was locked. 3 drawers, standard key lock, and the key wasn't anywhere I could find. I asked the assistant. She checked with Fiona. Fiona said she didn't know where the key was, and I was welcome to leave the cabinet. I took the whole thing, rented a dolly, loaded it into a friend's truck. Nobody stopped me because nobody was paying enough attention. I'm a nurse. I work in the cardiac step-down unit at UCSF Medical Center, which means I spend my days with people whose hearts have recently tried to fail them. I am good at my job. I say this not to brag, but because it's a relevant fact. Because the reason I am good at my job is that I learned very young to pay close attention to things other people were too distracted to notice. Subtle changes. The patient who says fine but is holding their breath. The chart discrepancy that looks like nothing until it doesn't. I noticed my father's changes in the last year of his life when the business stress had aged him visibly and my mother's complaints had grown louder, and Fiona had started including herself in conversations about the company's future with the comfortable assumption of someone who already sees herself as the heir. My father had gotten quieter, not depressed, concentrated, like he was thinking something through. He called me 3 times in the month before his stroke. That was unusual. My father was not a caller. We had a rhythm of maybe once a month, sometimes less, a brief check-in where we covered the surface of things and were both satisfied by it. 3 calls in 4 weeks was a pattern. I noticed it and filed it, and then the stroke happened and the call stopped, and I told myself it hadn't meant anything. The filing cabinet sat in my apartment for 4 months. I didn't force it open because I wasn't ready to find nothing, which is what I assumed would be in it. Old invoices. Copies of documents Fiona already had. Evidence, maybe, that the office contents were as meaningless as they appeared. It was my downstairs neighbor who finally helped me open it. He's a retired locksmith named Harold who spends most of his retirement feeding pigeons on the front steps and occasionally fixing things for people in the building. He had it open in under 3 minutes. The top drawer was what I expected. Business files, correspondence, vendor contracts from the early 2000s. The middle drawer was personal tax returns, insurance policies for the Marlin house, a folder of receipts that would have been relevant when he was alive. The bottom drawer had a manila envelope on top of everything else. It was sealed. My name was written on the front in my father's handwriting. Not Hazel Hale, not my full name, just Hazel. In the slightly cramped printing that I recognized from the birthday cards he had always given me, the ones that were never sentimental, but always specific, always exactly one observation about something he'd noticed about me that year. I sat down on my kitchen floor and held it for a long time before I opened it. Inside was a letter, handwritten, 7 pages, and behind the letter, a separate sealed envelope from an attorney's office I didn't recognize. Brentwood and Cole, with a San Francisco address, with a note from my father paper-clipped to the front, "Open this when you're ready, not before." I read the letter first. He had written it, he explained, because he was not good at saying things out loud to people he loved. He had known this about himself for a long time and had not fixed it, which he regretted. He wanted to tell me some things while he still could. He told me he had watched me become a nurse and he had been proud in a way he didn't know how to express, because in his family, his generation, his marriage, care work was what you did because you had no other options. He had known that wasn't true for me. I had options. I had chosen it. He wrote, "I didn't understand it when you first told me. I understand it now. You were braver than I was." He told me about his marriage. Things I had sensed but not known for certain. That it had been unhappy for a long time. That he had stayed for reasons that made sense at the time and seemed less clear to him now. That my mother was not a cruel person, but she had a way of making certain things invisible, and he had let her, and one of those things was me. He told me the will was structured the way it was because my mother's attorney had drafted it, and he had signed it 2 years ago during a period when he was too tired to fight about it, and he had regretted it ever since. And then he told me that he had spent the last year doing something about it. The sealed envelope from Brentwood and Cole, he explained, contained a codicil, a legal amendment to his will, executed 8 months before his death, witnessed by two people who had no connection to the family or the family attorney. In it, he had amended several things. The Tahoe property, which had been purchased with an inheritance from his mother, your grandmother, who you visited every summer and who loved you best, as I think you know, was to come to me. In addition, he had established a separate trust, funded through a life insurance policy my mother's attorney had not known about, the proceeds of which were to be distributed to me outright upon his death. He had not told my mother. He had not told Fiona. He had told his accountant, whom he had sworn to confidentiality, and the attorneys at Brentwood and Cole and Harold. I looked up from the letter. Then I went downstairs. Harold was in his usual spot on the front steps, scattering seed for a pigeon he called Gretchen. He looked up at me. He had, I realized, the expression of a man who has been waiting for something. He called you, I said. About 8 months ago, Harold said. Asked me to be a witness. Said you'd figure it out when you were ready. You kept this for 8 months and didn't say anything. He shrugged. He asked me not to. Man kept his word his whole life. Seemed right to keep mine. I won't pretend the next part was easy. Nothing about it was easy. I contacted Brentwood and Cole. The attorney, a woman named Miss Wren, was expecting my call. She walked me through the documents. The codicil was valid, properly executed, filed with the county. The life insurance trust had already cleared probate through a separate process my father's family attorney hadn't been involved in, which meant I needed to tell my family. I could have had Miss Wren send a letter. She offered to. I said no. I understand now that I needed to do it myself. Not for them, but for something in me that couldn't accept leaving this to paper. I drove to the Myron house on a Sunday afternoon in February. My mother was home. Fiona was there too, which I hadn't expected, but maybe should have. They had been going through the house together, deciding what to keep and what to sell. My mother had already had a contractor in to look at the guest bathroom. I sat at the kitchen table where I had eaten thousands of breakfasts. I put the folder from Brentwood and Cole on the table. My mother looked at the folder the way you look at something you want to dismiss before you've examined it. "What is this?" she said. It wasn't a question. "Dad amended his will," I said. 8 months before he died. The Tahoe property is mine. There's also a trust. Fiona sat down. She opened the folder before my mother did. She read it faster too. Fiona has always been quick with documents. It's one of the things she inherited from my father without knowing it. "This isn't possible," she said. "It's filed with the county. The original is with Brentwood and Cole. He never mentioned this." She was looking at me the way she had looked at me in the attorney's office. But the satisfied part was gone. "He would have said something." "He didn't want you to talk him out of it," I said. My mother had gone very still. She was looking at the papers with an expression I had never seen on her face before. I realized after a moment that it was something close to grief. Not for my father, or not only for my father, but for a version of events she had believed was settled. "He loved you," I said, and I was surprised by how much I meant it and how much it hurt to say. In whatever way he knew how, he was trying to fix what he let happen. Nobody said anything. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking somewhere down the street. My mother finally said very quietly, "The Tahoe property was supposed to go to Fiona's children." "Dad's mother's money bought that property," I said. "He wanted it to stay on his side of the family." Fiona closed the folder. She pushed it across the table toward me and stood up and went to the window. Her hands were at her sides. I watched her figure it out. Watched her understand that there was nothing to contest, no leverage to find, no version of this that undid what was in the document. "He had no right," she said. Not loudly, quietly, which was worse. "It was his estate," I said. She didn't respond. My mother was still looking at the table. I picked up the folder and I left. That was 14 months ago. The Tahoe property is mine now. It's a 3-bedroom cabin on a half-acre lot, half a mile from the lake, and it needs work. The deck is rotting, and the kitchen appliances are from 2003, and there's a tree that came down in last winter's storms and is still half blocking the side path. I've spent most of my days off up there this year, learning what I don't know about home ownership, which turns out to be considerable. I am not, for the record, someone who hates my family. I want to say that clearly, Because I think it matters. My mother is not a villain. She is a woman who built her sense of self around a particular idea of what her family was and what her daughters were supposed to be. And for a long time, I couldn't find a place in that idea. That hurt. It still does, but she's 71 and she's alone in that Marin house now. And I drove up there last month to help her figure out why the furnace was making a sound. And she made me lunch, and we sat at the kitchen table and didn't talk about any of the important things. And somehow, it was okay. Fiona and I don't speak. I think that's her choice. I've left the door open in the way you leave a door open when you're not sure what you'd do if someone walked through it. My father's letter is in the drawer of my nightstand. I've read it probably 30 times. Some parts I understand better now than I did the first time. Some parts I'm still working through. There's a line near the end that I keep coming back to. He wrote, "I was not always the father you deserved, but I never stopped watching you become who you were going to be. I was watching when you didn't know I was. I want you to know that. I think about the 3 phone calls in the month before his stroke. I think about the photo from your woods that I didn't know existed. I think about Harold on the front steps, keeping his word, waiting. My father was not good at the complicated things, but he did in the end one very complicated thing, and he did it right. Last month, I finally bought a kayak, something I'd been telling myself I'd do for years. I took it out on the lake for the first time on a Saturday morning in late October when the water was flat and cold and the mountains were starting to get snow on the high peaks, and I was the only person out there. My father liked the lake. He used to fish from the dock in the mornings when we came up as a family, before the family became what it became. I don't remember much from those trips, but I remember watching him from the kitchen window, standing at the end of the dock with a cup of coffee, perfectly still in the early light. I think he was paying attention to something. I think he was always paying attention. I understand that now. I come from him more than I knew. The water that morning was the color of pewter, and the air smelled like pine and cold, and somewhere in the trees a woodpecker was working at something steadily, knock after knock after knock. I paddled out until the cabin was small behind me. I stayed there for a long time. I've thought a lot about why my father did it the way he did, why he didn't just tell me, why he locked it in a cabinet, wrote my name in his cramped handwriting, and trusted a retired locksmith on the front steps to keep his secret for 8 months. I think he knew something I didn't know yet, that I needed to find it myself, that if he had handed it to me directly, it would have felt like rescue. And what he was trying to give me wasn't rescue, it was evidence. Evidence that I had already been seen long before I thought I was. That's the thing about integrity. The real kind, not the performed kind. It doesn't announce itself. My father was not a man who made speeches or set the record straight at dinner tables. He sat quietly at the kitchen window while the loudest voices in the room decided what the story was. For most of my life, I mistook his silence for agreement. I was wrong. He was paying attention. He was doing the slow, careful work of someone who understands that some things can't be rushed. And I think about Fiona too. Not with bitterness. Or not only that. Fiona is smart. She worked. She showed up in the ways our family recognized and rewarded. But somewhere along the way, she confused inheritance with worth. And when those two things get tangled up in a person, it does something to them. It narrows them. It makes them see a sister across a will-reading room and feel satisfied instead of curious. That narrowing has a cost. I don't think she's paid it fully yet, but costs like that have a way of compounding quietly, the same way the good things do. What I understand now, standing on the deck of a cabin I'm slowly fixing, is that the people who truly see you rarely make a lot of noise about it. Harold never said a word for 8 months. My father drove 3 hours to sit in a folding chair in a hospital auditorium. He kept a photo from your woods that I didn't know existed. These are small things. They are also the only things that lasted. I spent a long time waiting to be chosen by the loudest voices in the room. I wanted my mother to stop making the comments. I wanted Fiona to turn around at the right moment with an expression that wasn't satisfied. I wanted to be included in the version of the family that got told at dinner parties. That wanting was real, and I'm not ashamed of it. But I understand now that waiting for the loudest voices to validate you is how you hand them your whole life. My father's letter said he was watching when I didn't know he was. I think that's the truest thing anyone has ever said to me. The people worth becoming are usually built in rooms where nobody's watching, in overnight shifts and difficult patience, and driving 3 hours for a ceremony that doesn't make the family photo album. Character doesn't form under applause. It forms in the quiet. Hazel paddled out on that cold October morning not because she had won something. She paddled out because she had finally stopped needing to. That's the difference. And it took me a long time to understand it. But I'm standing in it now, and the water is still and cold, and the mountains have snow on them, and I think my father would have liked this morning very much.